Hi, everybody. I'm Mary, the OG Woo-Woo therapist, and welcome back to this week's episode, recorded in my functional but versatile home office that is only 1 block from the interstate, where traffic noise is a real thing and can be disruptive. So I apologize in advance for any noise disruptions. And as usual, because it is possible for some people to use this information to self-help, I have to tell you that everything I talk about today is not intended to take the place of counseling or therapy. It is only for educational purposes. If you relate to any of the information, do not self-diagnose or diagnose anyone else. Seek a professional to talk to about it. And I need to give the additional cautionary note that it's important to respect safety through pacing and supporting choice. And that means moving slowly, explaining concepts in a grounding way, and as always, you're invited to pause, skip ahead, or come back later. I encourage you to take the information in chunks. Today, I'm going to talk about another very important topic and a client-suggested one. I'm going to talk about shame and CPTSD dissociation. I will be going deeper into the nervous system mechanics behind shame and dissociation in complex trauma. This episode will also explore how polyvagal theory helps us understand why shame feels so overwhelming and why dissociation isn't weakness but protection. And we'll also understand why shame becomes identity. I will also touch briefly on shame and shadow work. Before we begin, let's take one slow, deep breath. Now do a longer exhale than the inhale. The longer exhale engages the vagus nerve and helps you with the body with feeling more relaxed. And now one more deep breath, slowly, and another slow, long exhale. Notice that the shoulders sometimes seem to lower when breathing like this for a couple of breaths. Now, moving on. In previous episodes, I have talked at length about polyvagal theory. Just a brief nudge here to remember that polyvagal theory describes 3 primary states: the ventral vagal, where safety and connection live. It is characterized by social engagement, eye contact, curiosity, flexibility, and emotional regulation. This is where healing happens. The sympathetic, where fight or flight live. It is characterized by anger, anxiety, panic, urgency, and hypervigilance. In shame, this often feels like I need to fix this immediately, or I have to defend myself. And the dorsal vagal, where shutdown and dissociation live. It is characterized by collapse, numbness, fog, hopelessness, and disconnection from the body. This is the state most associated with chronic shame in CPTSD. Shame says, hide, disappear, don't be seen. The dorsal vagal system makes that happen. In humans, shame activates shutdown. For mammals, social rejection equals threat. In early attachment trauma, a caregiver withdraws love, a child is criticized or humiliated, and/or emotional needs are punished. The nervous system interprets this as connection is dangerous. When connection feels unsafe and escape isn't possible, the body chooses dorsal shutdown. This is not conscious, it is reflexive in trauma. In early trauma, the child cannot leave, the child cannot fight, so the system collapses. That collapse becomes wired to shame triggers later in life, like criticism, conflict, intimacy, success, and being visible. The body doesn't ask, is this safe now? It asks, does this feel like then? And this is commonly referred to as a trauma trigger. Shame also engages the dissociation loop in dorsal collapse. Here's the polyvagal sequence that many CPTSD survivors experience. A trigger, like tone of voice, facial expression, or rejection, then a sympathetic spike, like panic or anger, then a rapid drop into dorsal shutdown and dissociation. And just to add to the fun, there's secondary shame for shutting down. That rapid drop is called a neuroception shift because of the subconscious detection of danger. Neuroception doesn't require thought. It scans tone, posture, and microexpressions. If early life taught me that expression leads to danger, my nervous system may default to invisibility, otherwise known as dissociation. Let's take a minute and reframe dissociation. Let's begin to talk about it as intelligent protection. Dissociation lowers heart rate, reduces emotional intensity, dampens pain, creates distance from overwhelm, and it is a biological anesthetic. When shame feels annihilating, the system says it's better to feel nothing than to feel this. Many survivors were shamed by parents and others for dissociating with questions like, "Why are you so distant? Why don't you care? Why are you overreacting?" But clinically, the system was doing its job, protecting itself from threat of danger. So let's look at how we move up the polyvagal ladder from dorsal vagal to ventral vagal, because healing means gently moving from dorsal to sympathetic to ventral, not by force, but by cues of safety. First, we mobilize gently. If in shutdown, we wiggle fingers, press feet into the floor, hum softly, or rock slightly. Small movement signals life. Second, we regulate breath with a longer exhale that activates ventral vagal tone. Try this slowly right now. Inhale to the count of 4 and slowly exhale to the count of 6. And let's do this a couple of times and see how that affects your body. And third, we co-regulate, which involves eye contact, a warm voice, and safe presence. Polyvagal theory emphasizes that we regulate in connection with others. Isolation can and does prolong shutdown. To rewire shame, we must pair healthy vulnerability with safety, which looks like, instead of forcing myself to talk about trauma while flooded, I say something like this. I notice my chest tightening while I talk about this. I'm going to take a breath and keep my feet on the floor. My body receives 2 signals simultaneously, which are this is hard, which is vulnerability, and I am safe right now, leading to emotional regulation. This dual signal allows the nervous system to process, express emotion, and remain connected, and experience visibility without rejection. This creates new neuroception data that being seen does not equal danger. A thing to remember here is that healthy boundaries are vital to development of healthy vulnerability. This builds secure attachment, emotional tolerance, reduced dissociation, and increased resilience. Sometimes it takes a lot of work to develop these healthy boundaries, especially when permission has never been given for the child to protect themselves. This must become a rinse and repeat cycle because repetition builds ventral strength. Neuroplasticity, or the brain's ability to learn through repetition, favors what is repeated. Small, consistent safety moments beat intense catharsis. Place one hand on your chest and say to yourself, my nervous system learned this to protect me. Now notice what you are feeling. Are you slightly more present? Slightly more connected? Let's look at how the process works. We're talking about one of the most misunderstood and painful experiences in complex trauma, deep pervasive shame, especially when it's paired with dissociation. Before we begin, a gentle reminder for you. This may bring up memories or sensations. Remember, you are in control. You can pause. You can stop. You can ground. If at any point you feel overwhelmed, press your feet into the floor and take one slow exhale that is longer than your inhale. Now, let's talk about why shame feels like identity, why dissociation protects you, how these systems formed, and how healing becomes possible. Shame in CPTSD is not ordinary embarrassment. It's not, I did something wrong. It's, I am wrong. In trauma psychology, shame is considered an attachment injury. When a child's emotional needs are met with rejection, punishment, mockery, or neglect, the brain must solve an impossible problem. If my caregiver is unsafe, but I need them to survive, the problem must be me. And that belief becomes encoded in the nervous system, leading to a myriad of false core beliefs like I'm bad, I'm evil, I'm inherently damaged, and countless other negative cognitions that determine how a person is in relationship to themselves and others. Neurobiologically, shame activates the anterior cingulate cortex, or the pain center in the brain. It activates dorsal vagal shutdown in many trauma survivors. It suppresses authentic self-expression. Over time, shame is found to be pre-verbal, or knowing something is wrong with me but not knowing why. Somatic, where the nervous system can't process shame only through thoughts or words. Identity-based, or takes on the belief or feeling that who you are is fundamentally flawed, unworthy, or defective. And automatic, where the brain rapidly reacts before there is time to think. Let's take a minute to talk about pre-verbal shame and somatic shame in trauma and how that becomes automatic and identity. Pre-verbal shame is shame that formed before a person had language, usually in infancy or very early childhood, typically before the age of 2 or 3. Because it developed before words existed in the brain, it is stored in the body, emotions, and nervous system rather than in clear memories or thoughts. Babies are completely dependent on caregivers to regulate their emotions. When caregivers are emotionally unavailable, rejecting or shaming, inconsistent or unpredictable, frightening or overwhelmed, it becomes an attachment wound for the infant. The infant's nervous system can experience distress without comfort or repair. Because the infant cannot think or speak yet, the brain encodes the experience as felt meaning rather than language. The implicit message becomes, I am too much, I am unwanted, I shouldn't exist like this. But the child never heard those sentences. The body simply learned the feeling and has adopted that as who and how they are. At this developmental stage, the right brain, which is the home of emotion, sensation, and attachment, is dominant. The left brain, which is the home of logic, language, and narrative, is not fully developed, so experiences are stored as body sensation, emotional states, nervous system patterns, and attachment expectations. Instead of a story like my parents shamed me when I cried. The experience may live as a tight chest when expressing needs, a sudden urge to disappear, and/or unexplained feelings of defectiveness. Because it has no clear narrative, pre-verbal shame often appears as global identity shame rather than shame about specific actions. Common experiences include feeling fundamentally flawed or broken, intense shame triggered by small mistakes, difficulty explaining why you feel ashamed, wanting to hide, disappear, or withdraw, and dissociation when emotionally exposed. A person may say, I don't know why I feel this way, I just feel like something is wrong with me. That is a classic signature of pre-verbal shame. Pre-verbal shame attaches to the sense of self, not just behavior. Healthy shame says, I did something wrong. Preverbal shame says, I am wrong. Because it formed during early identity development, it can feel absolute and unquestionable. Preverbal experiences are stored primarily in the limbic system, the home of emotion and reward, the amygdala, or threat detection smoke alarm, and or the body's autonomic nervous system. This is why shame often appears as physical reactions such as collapsing posture, urge to hide, heat in the face, stomach drop, and dissociation. The body remembers what the mind cannot narrate. Because preverbal shame exists below language, purely cognitive approaches can struggle to reach it. Healing often involves safe relational experiences, somatic regulation, attuned witnessing, and gradual exposure to vulnerability with safety. These experiences allow the nervous system to learn, I can be seen and still be safe. Healing happens through repeated experiences of safe connection and self-compassion, which slowly rewrite the original emotional learning. With somatic shame for people with trauma histories, the body may store emotional experiences that were too overwhelming to process at the time. Because those experiences were not fully integrated, they may resurface as body memories, physical sensations without clear cause, and sudden waves of pain during emotional triggers. In this sense, somatic pain can be understood as the body remembering the shame and trauma. Bessel van der Kolk has a good book about this called The Body Keeps the Score. Someone who has experienced chronic stress growing up might notice tight shoulders during conflict, stomach pain when expressing needs, or headaches after emotional conversations. The pain is not imagined. The nervous system has simply learned to express emotional distress physically. The body and mind are not separate. When emotions cannot be processed verbally, the body often carries them physically. Because the pain lives in the body, healing often involves body-based regulation, not just thinking differently. Helpful approaches can include slow breathing and nervous system regulation, gentle movement or stretching, somatic awareness or noticing sensations without judgment, trauma-informed therapy, and safe relational experiences. These practices help the body learn that it no longer needs to hold the shame at the same level of protection. Many times, the therapist is the first safe relational experience for many people who are holding this kind of shame. People experiencing automatic shame often say things like, I know logically I didn't do anything wrong. I don't know why I feel so embarrassed. I just instantly feel bad about myself. This happens because the response originates in implicit memory and the emotional brain, not in conscious reasoning. The thinking mind may only notice the reaction after it has already started. Automatic shame can persist through several reinforcing patterns like harsh self-criticism, replaying perceived mistakes, avoiding situations where shame might occur, and interpreting neutral reactions from others as disapproval. These patterns unintentionally strengthen the brain's expectation of shame. Because the response is conditioned, change usually involves creating new experiences that interrupt the pattern. Helpful steps may include noticing the shame response without attacking yourself, pausing and regulating the nervous system, questioning harsh self-judgments like asking yourself, what's your evidence that this is true? And experiencing safe relationships where vulnerability is accepted. With repeated experiences of safety and acceptance, the brain generally learns that the situation is not actually threatening. Over time, the automatic response can weaken. So let me ask you this. When you feel shame, what is the first sentence your mind says about you? As has been discussed in previous episodes, many times people adaptively dissociate when danger is perceived. And it is important to note that dissociation is not weakness, it is brilliance. When dissociation is perceived as weakness in yourself or by others, that becomes shame-producing. And when shame becomes overwhelming, the nervous system shifts into freeze, collapse, numbness, depersonalization, and emotional detachment. This is where polyvagal theory becomes integral to healing shame. According to polyvagal theory, the dorsal vagal system activates when connection feels unsafe and escape is impossible. In other words, if fight doesn't work, or isn't allowed, then the body shuts down or collapses. Dissociation protects you from emotional annihilation, attachment rupture, punishment, and abandonment. Ask yourself when shame rises, do I fight, fawn, or disappear? That disappearance once was necessary for safety. Here's the cycle for shame and dissociation. There is the trigger, which can be criticism, exposure, success, or intimacy. Then the shame story activates by bringing up all of the negative core beliefs that have been adopted. The body collapses or freezes, and then dissociation numbs sensation or the feelings associated with the negative core beliefs. Later, there is more shame for dissociating. That secondary shame is often louder than the original shame thoughts. Common secondary shame thoughts are, why am I like this? I should be over this, and I'm too broken. But let's consider this reframe. You are not broken. You are running an outdated survival program. Back in the day, we used to call this playing old tapes. Let's do a small practice. Place one hand on your chest. Say silently or out loud to yourself, this response once protected me. Notice if anything shifts. Shame typically originates in chronic emotional neglect, narcissistic or critical parenting, religious or cultural moral shaming, bullying, sexual trauma, being parentified, or being too much or not enough. For many with CPTSD, shame began before language. It may not be a memory, it may be a body state. You may not remember what happened, but your nervous system does. Here's an interesting question. If shame for you had an age, how old would it be? Many times, the social understanding for healing shame puts forth the idea that if I think more positive, affirming thoughts, then I can stop feeling shame. But with CPTSD, healing shame is not about positive affirmations. It is about safety, titration or taking it slow, and integration. There are 3 core practices. First, name it. This is shame. Naming activates the prefrontal cortex. Second, use the then versus now reorientation, which looks like this. Then I was small, I had no power, I depended on unsafe people. Now I am an adult, I have agency, I can choose safe connection. Say this out loud if you can. Third, reparenting the shamed part that looks like this. Imagine the younger part of you. Instead of correcting it, protect it. Say you were not bad, you were surviving. You did the best you could at the time. Now, pause and breathe. Finally, there is integration, and it doesn't feel dramatic. It feels slightly less collapse, slightly less hiding, slightly more breath, slightly more self-trust, and there may still be some dissociation sometimes, but that does not mean failure. It means the system is learning safety slowly. The goal of healing is not to eliminate dissociation. It is to widen the window of tolerance so shutdown becomes less necessary. One final thing about shame to make sure I cover as much as possible in terms of healing, we have to talk about shadow work. Shame and shadow work are deeply connected processes in psychological and spiritual healing. In many trauma-informed and depth psychology frameworks, shame is one of the primary emotions that pushes parts of ourselves into the shadow. Because shame feels intolerable to the nervous system, the mind often protects itself by hiding the shame parts of the self. These hidden parts form the shadow. Common things that get pushed into the shadow because of shame are needs that are emotional, relational, or sexual, anger or rage, vulnerability, desire for attention or validation, sensitivity, power or confidence, trauma memories, and parts of identity that were rejected in childhood. So the psyche creates a rule. If I show this part of me, I will be rejected or abandoned. The mind then dissociates from that part, and we become ashamed of that part. The shadow is a concept from the field of Carl Jung. It refers to the parts of ourselves that we learned were unacceptable, unsafe, or unlovable, so we push them out of awareness. The shadow is not just bad parts. It often contains creativity, sexuality, anger, assertiveness, intuition, grief, joy, and unmet needs. When shame is present, these parts become exiled. The process usually happens in childhood. Here's an example sequence. A child expresses something natural like anger, need, curiosity, or emotion. The caregiver responds with criticism, withdrawal, ridicule, punishment, or emotional neglect. The child concludes, something about me is wrong. To preserve attachment, the psyche decides, I must hide this part of myself. That hidden part becomes shadow material. For people with trauma or CPTSD, this process can happen repeatedly, creating many shadow fragments. Shadow work means bringing those hidden parts back into awareness with compassion. The process usually includes recognizing triggers, identifying shame reactions, meeting the exiled part, and integrating it back into the self. Instead of rejecting the part, you say, you belong here. This reduces shame and heals identity fragmentation. There are signs that a shadow part is activated. You may notice intense emotional reactions, disproportionate anger or defensiveness, jealousy or envy, strong judgment of others, sudden shutdown or dissociation, and or repeating relationship patterns. These reactions often point to a hidden shame wound. We can notice this activation by examining our reactions to determining the possible shadow. For example, if I have anger at needy people, it could be the shadow of my own unmet needs. If I am judging emotional people, it could be the shadow of my suppressed vulnerability. If there is fear of being seen, it could be the shadow of my shame about authenticity. If I am overachieving, it could be the shadow about my worthiness. Shadow work asks, what part of me am I not allowed to be? What part of me am I ashamed of? There could be heightened shame during shadow work. When shadow material surfaces, shame often appears immediately. People may feel embarrassment, self-disgust, fear, or rejection, or feeling too much or not enough. This is normal. The nervous system learned that visibility equals danger. Healing occurs when vulnerability is paired with safety, something I spoke about earlier. That means gentle awareness, safe compassion, supportive environments, and somatic regulation. Here is a simple shadow work exercise for shame. First, notice the trigger and ask, what just made me react strongly? Second, identify the shame story behind our common shame beliefs, like I'm too much, I'm not enough, I'm unlovable, I'm broken, or I'm weak. Third, meet the exiled part. Imagine the part of you that learned that belief and ask, how old does this part feel? What was happening when it learned this? And what did the part of me need that it didn't receive? Fourth, offer a new response. Tell that part, you make sense. You are not bad. I'm here with you. This is integration. The goal of shadow work is wholeness, not perfection. When shame dissolves, people often regain authenticity, emotional freedom, creativity, deeper relationships, self-trust, and spiritual connection. And instead of fighting parts of yourself, the psyche becomes integrated. Here is a powerful truth about shame and shadow work. The parts of you that were rejected often contain the most life energy, and once they are reclaimed. In conclusion, healing shame is not about arguing with thoughts. It's about teaching the body that you are safe now. You are not defective. You are adaptive. And adaptation can evolve. Through healing shame, we are also able to reclaim those dissociated shadow parts of self, to be wholly integrated and no longer ashamed of who and how we are. I want to leave you with this thought. Shame is not proof of defect. It is proof that you adapted to survive environments that could not hold your authenticity or let you be who you are. Dissociation is not pathology. It is an intelligent nervous system response to unbearable emotion. Healing is not erasing these parts. It is integrating them. Well, that's it for this week. I want to thank you for spending the time with me to engage my content. If you like the content, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I will be back next week with another client-suggested topic. In the meantime, take care of your nervous system. Bye for now.